Well, we're back on the Courtroom Chronicles podcast, and as usual, we have County Attorney Kent Volkmer. And Kent, we must be doing something right when we have a former employee want to come in and hang out with us. Sharon, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
So Sharon was past tense our victim services manager, and new to retirement, I think, from just a few days, right?
As of Wednesday.
And how's it going?
It's going well. I'm still waking up early.
I would beg to differ. You are literally back here
This
2 days
is
later.
true.
So you never truly
I
retired.
can't get away from here.
So the reason we brought Sharon in is she was our victim services manager. She has a wealth of experience, and victims, I think, a lot of time are part of the process that gets overlooked, especially in high profile cases. There's so much attention given to the defendant and that individual. I think a lot of times victims just are not given the visibility maybe that they really deserve. And I think a lot of people don't even know, we'll talk about this in a second, that if you are a victim of a crime, there's actually a lot of rights afforded to you.
Yes.
And Sharon, I'll start with you. Just first give us a sense. You dealt with a lot of victims over your career. What is it like for a lot of them who are entering the criminal justice process? Not something they want to do, obviously,
No.
but it's a really foreign thing to them.
For most victims, this is something they never imagined themselves to be in. They don't learn about being a victim, so they don't understand the process. A lot of it's legalese, so there's things that are really overwhelming for them, and we help them navigate through that.
And a lot of times it could be a loved one who's passed away because of the incident.
Yes.
And just emotionally, how a lot of times are they holding up?
It's some people are dealing with it head on, and others are the deer in the headlights and don't know where to go or what to do. And so they look to us to be that voice and to help them understand and navigate everything that's been thrown at them.
Yeah, and Kent, we have a whole victim services team that is dedicated to this.
Absolutely. So Arizona's unique. We actually embedded our Victims' Bill of Rights into our Constitution. So each county attorney's office is charged with upholding victims' rights. So yeah, we have an entire division. They're actually embedded in each of our floors. And the title, a victim advocate, I think is a little bit misleading because there's so much more. Sometimes they're a shoulder to cry on. They're always sort of a navigator or a wizard. I think that was the language that Sharon used as a navigator, just because, again, when you learn in your junior high or high school, history class or your civics class, they don't really teach you all of the ins and outs. I mean, you have a general understanding. You may have watched CSI and Law and Order, those type of things, but the reality is very different. And just how long things take and why they take that long, and all of these rights that are afforded to the defendant that don't seem like they're being afforded to the victim. I mean, it's confusing. As you said, Mike, it's this highly emotional time. Some people are still processing. They're dealing with either being victimized or a loved one's been victimized. So really, they're there to guide them through the process, to be able to just be that crying shoulder, to be that friend, to be that person that's going to sit beside them and do what they can.
And Sharon, just from the onset, how does this kind of work when somebody enters as a victim, from the victim's perspective, the criminal justice system in this process? Where did you all come in? No, I mean, where does the victim services come in, and how does that kind of initial contact take place?
Quite often, victim services is the first point of contact with the county attorney's office. As soon as a case is charged, we will send out that initial paperwork explaining to them the charges that are going to be brought forth, and that they have a prosecutor that's assigned to the case, and they can always contact us.
Is it kind of like you're almost an intermediary between
We
the victim
quite
and the
often
prosecutor?
are. And sometimes it's not a shoulder to cry on. Sometimes it's the first person they can vent to and yell at because they have nobody else to yell at. And so we understand that it's not us directly that they're yelling at. They're screaming at the injustice of what happened and whoever was taken from them.
And Kent, you talked about the Victim's Bill of Rights. So if I'm a victim or a loved one of mine was a victim, what does that entitle me to? I mean, what does that mean for all practical purposes?
Look, you have the right to be treated fairly. You have the right to a speedy and expeditious resolution. You have the right to be heard. You are not just a bystander who we get to kind of just treat as an afterthought. You are actually a party. You're a part of the system, and it's embedded in our Constitution. I mean, you can actually look it up. You can see all of those rights, but it really surrounds that kind of right to be treated with respect, the right to be treated fairly, the right to swift, fair justice, and the right to be heard. Those are the primary rights. There are other very specific enumerated, but that's sort of the big picture.
Does every state have that?
No. Most states try to have some sort of victims' rights, and most of them are statutorily created. Ours are actually embedded in our Constitution.
And Sharon, what are some of the biggest, I guess you said victims like to vent sometimes.
Yes.
What are some of the biggest complaints? Because I imagine, and I think Kent already brought it up, one of is the process goes a lot slower than what you see on TV and what a lot of people think.
They see on TV. They do quite often are frustrated at the delay, at the length. They feel that the defendant has all of the rights and that they don't have any other rights. When a plea is offered, it doesn't match what has happened to them, and nothing can match what has happened to them. So that is something that's hard for some to swallow.
And Ken, if you can kind of talk about that, especially when you talk about how long some of these things take, there is that balance that even judges are weighing, right? When it comes to, defendants can cause this process to take a lot longer than everyone would like.
They can. But the problem, I guess, is that we want to get it right. Mm-hmm. So victims oftentimes, they want that immediate justice. I mean, look from their perspective. That person punched him in the face and broke their nose. They know that person did it. They were there. They saw them. Like, this isn't that complicated, folks. But under the law, we have to get all kinds of things like medical records to show that it was actually broken. Then we have to interview the doctor. There's all these procedural justice sort of benchmarks that are there. And if we bypass any of those, if the defendant isn't afforded those, then they get a whole new trial. And then 2 or 3 or 5 years later, we're back there again. So it's not just the victim or the defendant that's slowing things down. It is medical records, it's investigation, it is the court process itself. It's all designed to make sure that we do it once and we do it right and it's best for everybody. And it's frustrating.
Because even if we go too quickly, then it just kind of screws everything up, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Absolutely. I mean, what happens if after the fact we discover additional information? We now have to disclose that to the defendant. We potentially are going to have to retry an entire case. So this victim has already been re-traumatized. They've already sat through a trial. They've testified. They've had the opportunity to be heard. They got resolution. They're now moving on with their life. And now some judge wearing a black robe is going to come and say, hey, we're going to do this all again. So it becomes a process where we need to make sure that we do it right, because even though it's slow now, it's much slower if we screw something up.
And Sharon, not in every case, but in a lot of cases, victims will even have to testify.
Right.
What is that like for you? Because I imagine a lot of them, on a lot of occasions, have to confront their attacker. And what is just that like when the conversations you have with them and preparing them for trial and that sort of thing?
Between the cases, sometimes we've had children that have had to come in and testify, and sometimes it takes a while. We try to prepare them by playing, the defense attorney and trying to ask those kind of questions so that we can understand and let them see what's going on. We had one victim that was a victim of a case. She came in to testify and promptly went and threw up. It's unnerving for them because this is not their life normally. So we try to take the time. Recently, we've gotten our court facility dog that's in training that is an asset that can help calm them and go with them and sit with them, so that's another tool that we can use to prepare and help them to be able to testify.
And his name's Luke. We've got his picture up on the screen. Yes.
Let me jump in there a little bit, though, Mike. I want you and I want our listeners to kind of think about it. There was a study that was done a number of years ago, like, what is your greatest fear? And one of the greatest fears for the general public is public speaking. Yes. So now imagine that that's your greatest fear. And when you go into a courtroom, it's not warm and fuzzy. It's not packed like, you see it when it's on TV. You've got jurors that are sitting there. You don't know any of them. You've got a judge. Everything's very formal. It's very stilted. There's not a lot of smiling, friendly faces there. And you're reliving publicly this terrible thing that happened to you, whether you were assaulted or a loved one was killed, whatever happened. You were being forced to just publicly relive this while somebody's basically calling you a liar or trying to point out all your inconsistencies or why you didn't remember or how much you had to drink. So it is a very adversarial, it's a very difficult situation. It's scary for the best of us, let alone a victim who is now reliving this trauma once again. So that's the reason our advocates are so important, to prepare them for it, to be there, to be that smiling, friendly face, to have Luke or to have somebody there so they know that they have support there, because it's a cold, stark world otherwise.
And once you get past, a conviction, Kent talked about the right to be heard. And I think a lot of that is being able to speak at the sentencing hearing and really letting the judge know how this has affected your life, your family's life. That is, maybe it's not empowering for everybody, but I think that it is empowering for a lot of people in a lot of cases. I mean, am I on the right path there?
Yes,
What is
it is something that victims need to do. We recently had a vehicular homicide, and the family came to court for every hearing, and they brought their loved one's ashes with them to have that person present in their mind, to be a part of this hearing. And so at sentencing, they'll bring pictures. Quite often they may have a memorial and things like that. It's very important for them. It's a way to release a lot of what they weren't able to say to that defendant all the way through the court process.
And Kent, what impact can that have on a judge who is ultimately the one that makes the sentencing decision?
So realize when a judge is looking at the case, what they're looking at is, a defendant saying, hey, give me mercy. I made a bad choice one time, cut me some slack. And this is really saying, hey, judge, this is the whole context of the crime. This is the actual impact that it had. Don't look at it just from how it's going to impact, the defendant's life and that his kids are going to be without their father or their mother or whatever. Look at the entirety of the picture. So it gives that whole picture. Mm-hmm. The other thing I did want to add on too is with our advocates, you'd be surprised how many victims become afraid to stand up and to say that statement. So oftentimes our advocates are actually the voice. The victims will write out what they once said, but it'll actually be Sharon and her team who stand up and actually put sound to those victims' words because it's too emotional, it's too tough, it's just too overwhelming. So they actually become the voice for the victims. Yes. And I would say almost more times than not, it seems like it's actually the advocates who are the voice for the victims.
Yeah, and Sharon, what is that like for you and the team? Just being able to represent victims through this process, and in some cases even putting their words to the judge, and how does it kind of hit you emotionally?
It feels good. It also makes us part of what they're going through, to be able to be their voice. It really is important to get it out there, and we've been with them through all of the court hearings. So when they get to that last stage and they can't make their statements on their own, they know that we're there to do it for them.
And I know, you all are doing everything possible to help victims out, but Ken talked about, the defendants a lot of times will want mercy and want slack.
Right.
Obviously, victims a lot of time will want the max punishment.
Yes.
So Kent, if I'm a victim in a case, how much weight do you give if I go, I don't love the plea offer you guys are making, or I want you to throw the book at them, how much weight do you give what a victim wants when you're assessing how to charge a case and what to ask for?
So obviously we always take that into consideration, but the other thing that we have to balance that with when we're looking at it from a kind of global perspective is the victim knows what happened in this case and they know how it impacted them in this case. But we also look at fairness throughout the entirety of the justice system. So that victim may be like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. The appropriate consequence is 25 years in jail or prison. And we're looking at it saying, it was traumatic, it was awful for you, but similarly situated individuals are typically getting 2.5 years in prison. So it can't be exclusively driven by the victims. And then sometimes the contrary is true. Most people that are victimized know their perpetrator. So oftentimes that it's a family member who's either dealing with mental health issues or substance abuse issues. Once they've gotten those issues resolved, the family's like, okay, I want to bring them back in. And they oftentimes are actually saying we don't even need punishment anymore, or just bring them home. So we have to be that sort of even keel, but we certainly take it in and we take into consideration the impact that it had on the family, the fabric of society, what they want. And it is certainly an important piece that we consider, but we can't let it drive or we would just get disparate sentences across the board.
And Sharon, I know you did this for a long career. What's the thing that stands out to you the most when you look back at your experience with victims and helping them and guiding them through this process?
When somebody comes back and says, thank you, I didn't know that you were doing this for my benefit, because they don't see it in the beginning. When you have a young, challenged person that sends you a letter in their own handwritten, and they see you, and that's what makes it worth it. 99% of the time you don't get the thank yous, but it's those little 1% of thank yous that really makes it worthwhile.
And I guess I'll end it with this. What is, because you never know who comes across the podcast. Could be somebody not even in Pinal County, just maybe entering the criminal justice system as a victim. What is your advice to somebody who finds themselves a victim of a crime, or their loved one has been the victim of a crime? Just for so many people, it's the big scary criminal justice system. What is your, I guess to both of you, what is the message to people who are coming into this for the first time as a victim in some way, shape, or form?
I would say lean on that advocate. Ask as many questions as possible. There are no dumb questions. Everything is designed to help you through the process, and that's what we're here for.
Along those same lines, don't be a passive participant.
Yes.
Make sure your voice is heard. Our system is set up so your voice needs to be heard. We as prosecutors hear what you have to say. We have advocates that are designed to help amplify your voice, to make sure that the court, to make sure that you are a participant in what's happening. And if you don't engage and you sit back, you never know what's really going to happen.
Right. Sure. Well, Sharon, both of you, I appreciate you sharing this, really valuable information. Hopefully it helps folks out there going forward. And Sharon, appreciate all your service to everyone who lives here in Pinal County.
Thank you.
And now
I've got a plug. If you have any interest in being a victim advocate, we are always looking to bring people in.
Yes.
It is a very rewarding position. Maybe not financially, but it is very personally rewarding. It's also not as easy as you think. There is some vicarious trauma. You're dealing with people that are struggling. But if that's something that weighs on your heart, I'd encourage you to look at our website. I'd encourage you to look at our county attorney's job postings. And we're always looking for great advocates to come help those in our community that need assistance.
PinalCountyAttorney.org. And we have extra openings now because Sharon's one of the ones leaving, and you can go spend your time on a cruise ship somewhere.
Cruise ship, yes.
Maybe multiple times a year.
Multiple.
So I appreciate your time. And for all of you who listened or watched, we'll see you next time on Courtroom Chronicles with the County Attorney.